Throw a chair through a window and call it a day. By Jaded Ghoster. Read by Rat Overlord. Chapter 4. That one Melanie Martinez song? Yeah. Summary. Aizawa and Midoriya's third course of action. Recovery Girl.
Strongest advantage.
That's what his teacher had called his hero analysis notebooks. The notebooks that he had worked on for over 10 years, that he had been ridiculed, burned, and attacked for, being called his strongest advantage as a hero. It didn't make any sense to Isuku. His classmates said the notebooks were stalkerish and creepy. His teachers said it was some sort of coping mechanism that he had started as a way to ignore reality. And even his own mother, no matter how much he loved her, got this horribly sad look in her eye whenever she used to see him writing in them. It felt like a knife twisting in his gut, knowing that people hated his notebooks. But he's long since accepted it. He's come to terms with the fact that nobody besides himself understood the value that each page held, and they never would. So why did Aizawa-sensei? Not only had he praised him for it, he even gave him suggestions on how to develop it, and the suggestions were thought out, too. Not like the ones Kacchan used to make about feeding it to the dogs, because at least then it'll be useful. Isuku hates to say it, but for a split second, he almost listened to the blonde-haired boy. All he wanted was for his analysis to help him be a hero, to help save others. If he had fed it to the dogs, then, well, it'd have some worth. And back then, he'd take what he could get about having worth. But Aizawa-sensei said it already did, and, in turn, that he already did. All in all, it was a very jarring experience. It felt like getting cold water dumped on his head after 10 years of agony in a scalding hot ocean of his tears. Talk about poetic. It was so different from what he was used to. He thought gaining One for All would be the missing piece he needed to make him a hero, or just the trust of the number one hero himself. So to hear that the piece he needed was tightly clutched in his hand all along... Holy shit. Isuku heard a loud snort behind him and whipped around in his seat, coming face to face with a snickering Kaminari. Oh Lord, did he say that out loud? It was at that moment he realized he was completely surrounded by over half the class, all of them staring at him with varying expressions. The Baku squad and the Emo squad were looking at him with mirth in their eyes and barely concealed laughter. Isuku's closest friends were all shell-shocked as their jaws hung wide open. Well, as shocked as Todoroki could look. And Kacchan just looked very pale? Strange.
Sorry, were you guys saying something?
He asked innocently, desperately trying to fight that growing blush on his neck that came from the embarrassment of not paying attention to his surroundings as well as openly cursing. It couldn't have been too bad, though, right? Yeah. Uraraka choked out, still at a loss for words. Mina sent us the video she took yesterday during lunch, and we were wondering why you and Aizawa-sensei were throwing tables around. Ugh, crap again. It's not like he can tell them the truth. If he and Aizawa-sensei wanted this whole merging departments plan to work out long term, no one else could find out about it, especially not the students themselves. He could always come up with an excuse, but let's be honest, his lying skills will land him in an even worse situation. Wincing, he replied with the only answer that he could.
About that, it's sorta, maybe kinda classified?
Jiro raised an eyebrow. Is that a question or an answer?
A very subtle threat.
Isuku didn't know when he started subtly threatening people, but it was probably around the same time the secretary thing started. Listening to Aizawa-sensei's constant snarky remarks about Vlad-sensei was really getting to him. Sometimes he wondered whether snapping at the blonde hero was just a natural reflex for the man, or if he stayed up the night before writing all of his insult ideas down beforehand. And, honestly, he wouldn't be surprised either way.
Come on! There has to be some things that you can tell us!
Kaminari whined, trying and failing to achieve puppy eyes. Even Jira rolled her eyes at his awful attempt. Still, despite the lack of persuasion from the electric blonde, Isuku knew that Kirishima and Ashura wouldn't let him leave alone without at least some details about his temporary position. Sighing, he gave in.
I guess so. What do you want to know?
Not even a second after he had uttered those words did a devilish grin spread across the faces of his classmates. Isuku froze as an ice colder than Todoroki's right side spread throughout his veins, the regret of his question really setting in. Sarah was the first to speak.
When the rest of us leave for first period, where do you and Aizawa-sensei go?
Well, that wasn't as bad as he was expecting.
Oh, we go to Netsu's office. His computer has access to the most important files, and he has really nice coffee.
Ida slightly narrowed his eyes. Oh God, did he already say something incriminating?
You drink coffee? I thought you preferred tea.
His friends noticed his beverage preference? Isuku felt a warm, tingly feeling bubble up in his chest, proof of his appreciation for that little detail. In any case, he answered.
Oh, I do, but after watching Aizawa-sensei drink coffee a lot, I figured I should give it a try. It's pretty good if you add a bit of sugar.
And it was also pretty good without sugar, which Isuku found weird since he usually disliked bitter drinks. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Todoroki choke and tense up at that statement before grabbing a notebook and writing something down. How strange. But before the green-eyed child could question it, Hagakure was already asking the next question, the shifting of her uniform telling him that she was waving her arms around.
2 days ago, I saw Aizawa-sensei chilling in the shadows and smirking at something in the hallway. I didn't question it at first because, hello, it's Aizawa we're talking about.
Every one of his classmates gave a nod of agreement, not even needing an explanation.
But then I heard a crash and a bunch of cursing that could only come from Baku bronchitis.
What the hell did you just call me?
And I was like, bitch, what? So after a few seconds, I rounded the corner, and you know what I saw? You tackling Boom Boom Boy to the ground, and Vlad Sensei standing there in horror. Just like, why?
Isuku could ask her the same question. He knows for a fact that before he and Aizawa-sensei acted out their plan, they had checked for witnesses and spectators, and they had seen and heard nothing. He would have remembered if he saw a floating uniform anywhere, so the only conclusion that the green-haired child could come to is that Hagakure regularly walks around the school naked to maximize her invisibility quirk.
Why? Is it for pranks or something?
In any case, he answered the best he could.
A persuasion technique.
They all gave him a blank stare as he wilted. Was he not specific enough? He opened his mouth to speak again, hoping that saying a slight emotional manipulation sounded better and not totally psychotic.
Shut your mouth, extras! I'm asking next!
Isugu flinched at the sudden noise, flipping his head around to face the explosive blonde. Kacchan huffed a bit before giving his full attention to Isugu, glaring at him and eyes widening a bit when he realized that he got no reaction. Shaking off the shock, he spoke.
Since when does the useless nerd like you attempt to glare?
The forest-eyed child gasped.
Attempt? It didn't work?
And he was so confident in his results too. Oh, crap. This is going to be a hassle to deal with now, isn't it?
Now we have to start the experiment all over again.
Kacchan spluttered as the boy reached for his analysis notebook.
What experiment?
Huh? Oh.
The intimidation experiment.
He replied cheerfully.
During Monday's vote, I glared at Vlad Sensei, and it must have been pretty effective because he ended up listening to me.
He also shivered a bit, which is kind of strange, since it's a grown man / pro hero / teacher being slightly scared by a teenage student.
You... Vlad? Huh?
Ashida shrieked, slapping her hands on her cheeks.
I know, right? And then after that, Aizawa-sensei told me that while my glaring is effective, it can't hurt to practice more.
Isugu pressed a finger to his cheek and thought, much like Suyu.
In fact, he's the one who suggested that I try it out on you guys, especially you, Kacchan.
The smiling boy said it so happily and innocently, and so painfully unaware of the scheme their teacher was pulling. Or, as he would call it, a logical ruse. Kacchan glared at the ground as if it had personally offended him, but knowing the explosive boy, it probably did somehow.
Damn hobo bastard!
Izuku paid no mind to the words.
He even gave me suggestions for other types of intimidation techniques.
He thought he heard Momo mutter something along the lines of, "Oh no," behind him, but he brushed it off as his mind playing tricks on him. Because how could these lessons be a bad thing?
Such as having the person meet you in a place that you're familiar and comfortable with. That way you know that they're in your territory and you have all the power. Deliberately making a person wait for you to speak so they know that your time is more important than theirs. He actually did that yesterday morning. Another one is forcing you to make an important decision before you're ready to, and using dark humor to poke at your flaws.
Izuku paused for a second in thought, oblivious to the extreme crisis his classmates were going through as they started to put all of Aizawa-sensei's intimidation puzzle pieces together and figure out the big picture. He knew there was one more technique that his teacher told him to use, and one that he favored and did more often. Strength in numbers, raising their voice, threatening to walk out, all were great, but they still weren't the skill he was looking for. And then it hit him!
Oh, right!
He exclaimed, drawing everyone's attention to him.
That's what the last tactic was!
All of their stomachs dropped, filling with unbridled fear. Reluctantly, but bravely, Ida asked what they all were thinking.
What was it?
The green child smiled.
If someone were not to comply with their wishes, they would threaten them with unreasonable consequences.
The classroom door burst open just as the bell rang, and the teacher they all know, love, and slightly fear stalked in. The underground hero left a familiar trail of confidence and conviction behind him, dark eyes gleaming with appraisal as he gazed at his students. However, there was something very different about him. He looked professional. Not that he doesn't always have an air of professionalism about him, but today it seemed that he dressed the way he acts. And now that Izuku thinks about it, he looks quite similar to how he did during the Camino press conference last year, except slightly less depressed. He had a white button-down shirt and a light blue tie with navy blue stripes. He had a black blazer strung over his arm. He had dress pants and shoes, and his hair was pulled back in the same style as last time. Hey, wait a second. That looks a lot like the hairstyle his mom uses. The child was pulled out of his thoughts by the sound of his teacher's gruff voice. At least that's the same.
Get to class or you're expelled.
We all know it's an intimidation technique by now, but even so...
Kaminari let out a sigh that told a tale of both awe and pain. Aizawa-sensei raised an eyebrow, but Ashido and Kacchan beat him to the punch.
I didn't know you were capable of dressing fancy!
Why do you look less like a homeless person than usual?
Both very different statements, but implying the same confusion nonetheless. His teacher rolled his eyes.
Classified.
Another choking sound came from Todoroki, and Izuku had half the idea to offer him a cough drop at this point.
Now are you going to sit there and stare, or do you actually want to be on time for class? Mike's not a yeller, but he will give you a very disappointed stare.
That statement alone was enough to snap the rest of Izuku's class out of their shock from his outfit, all of them deathly afraid of disappointing the most enthusiastic teacher at UA. Not even 5 seconds had passed before all of them were already out the door, Aizawa-sensei and Izuku being the only ones left in the classroom. Without wasting any more time, as usual, the grumpy teacher huffed and turned to the boy, handing him a brown messenger bag. A bag he couldn't help but notice looked quite similar to the one Aizawa-sensei had. The bushy-haired child graciously accepted the item and immediately moved to view its contents, unable to control his curiosity. Much to his shock and delight, he found 2 brand-new notebooks inside, as well as a pack of 0.5mm mechanical pencils, lead and spare erasers included. God, he forgot how amazing new pencils were. as well as the fact that this is what he required as payment 2 days ago. Wait, how many pencils does he get paid in again? What's his pencil per hour rate?
Somehow you burned through the last 4 notebooks, so I figured you needed a new supply for today.
Isuku stared up at his teacher in awe, barely restraining himself from jumping with joy. He was just about to thank the man, and most likely ask him how he knew the best brand of pencils, when he realized he had just ignored several strange things.
Wait, huh?
Then he realized how rude that sounded and started waving his arms around in panic, as he usually did in embarrassing situations like this.
I mean, thanks for the notebooks and pencils, especially since it included not only just spare lead, but also extra erasers too, which is pretty weird since I don't think I've ever seen that in other packs before. It's pretty useful, but that's not the point.
Wow, he sure does love getting off track, huh?
I was just wondering, what do you mean for today?
Today's a tighter packed schedule than usual. Only one plan to take care of, but it's a lot more complicated and will most likely require you to write more. Might as well be prepared.
Oh, well, that's okay. Personally, Isuku has never had a problem with busy schedules. In fact, he loved them. It made him feel accomplished, and like he wasn't wasting time. Like he wasn't a waste of time. But despite that, he was still a little confused.
Oh, okay, but then why the new bag?
Not that he's complaining, it did have quite a lot of useful pockets.
It's lighter to carry around for long periods of time compared to your other bag, which for some reason still has all your textbooks and binders.
Aizawa gave him a suspicious look, and Isuku blushed, rubbing the back of his neck and holding the bag in his other hand.
Just in case I needed it. But also, long periods of time?
Isuku looked at his teacher's outfit and gasped.
Is that why you're wearing a suit? Does one of the plans require going someplace fancy? Is it a hero agency? A birthday party? Or, oh my god, is it a funeral? Should I change?
The underground hero held up a hand, silencing his ramblings.
First off, you're right about me needing to change my attire for today's plan.
Judging by the annoyed expression on his face, he wasn't too happy about that. He thinks he gets why, though. It must be irritating to transition from loose black hero costume to an uncomfortable button-up.
But it's not as fancy so much as it is a professional setting. Musutafu General Hospital.
Huh?
The boy asks dumbly, eyebrows knitting in confusion.
Recovery Girl's one-woman job shtick has gone on long enough. It's time to get her some coworkers.
Wait a second. Does that mean...
You're doing job interviews?
He screamed in amazement, no longer able to hold back his jumping. It's not like anyone can blame him, though. He's always seen job interviews on TV, but never in real life, and he didn't know if they were even remotely similar, or if the recording studio made it too dramatic. The whole idea in general may seem boring to others, but it sounded like paradise to Isuku. Asking questions about their motivations to pursue their dream job? It's very nostalgic.
I don't know what kind of job interviews you've been to, but I can guarantee it's not that fun.
His teacher gave an amused huff and made his way out the door, Isuku following closely behind at his heels as he continued the conversation through the hallway.
It'll be pure luck if you can avoid the interviewee's wrath from rejection. If there even is interviewees, that is.
No one applied for the job?
That didn't sound right.
We can't be sure till we get there. I sent out an email to the hospital telling them to inform their staff that there are about 5 positions open and that we'd be reviewing any applicants. Normally, you wouldn't be able to hire straight from a hospital, but I guess UA has some privileges.
That's a bit of a downplay. UA could practically do whatever they wanted and get away with it. Not that they would, but there's been a few instances where you could see the raw power that they have. The school has partial guardianship over hero students, they somehow got the approval for the 0-pointers at the entrance exam, and their budget is out of this world.
But then again, it was a last-minute kind of thing, and they most likely hadn't had the time to gather a lot of people. Plus, a lot of people ignore the injury part of being a hero and don't think the medical department is all that important. And because of that, we'll probably only get about 15 people at most, and only 3 are competent enough to live up to UA's insane standards.
Well, that sucks. Isuku would have suggested to his teacher that they wait a little longer to hatch this plan, but he knows that's impossible. If they don't do it today, it'll never get done. They have a week to be the all-powerful principal and secretary duo, and a small part of Isuku wishes that it was just a little bit longer. But enough negativity.
3's better than nothing, at least. If there's any possible way we can take some work off of Recovery Girl's back, we should take it.
Isuku thought he felt Aizawa-sensei staring holes in his head, but it must have been his senses playing tricks on him.
I think the stress of having to take care of reckless heroes and Hero Corps students is starting to get to her, or at least getting to her more than last year when she told me that she'd stop healing my broken bones if I didn't learn how to control my quirk. So this could really help her.
The child said those words so giddily, but the smile was wiped off his face at the sight of his teacher's expression. His black eyes were wide as saucers as he stared at him, mouth opening and closing like he had no idea what to say. Isuku couldn't quite place the emotion on his face, but he was 100% sure he did not want to find out. It was the middle ground between shocked, confused, and, worst of all, angry. The green-haired boy felt his heart stop. Was his teacher mad at him for suggesting that Recovery Girl couldn't handle it all? Oh no, that sounds so rude now that he thinks about it. He opened his mouth and lifted his arms, ready to wave them around and spit out endless apologies, but Aizawa-sensei beat him to the punch.
She said what?
He asked darkly. Oh God. Isuku looked like a deer caught in headlights.
She said she'd stop healing my quirk injuries if I didn't learn how to control it, but that was her decision, not mine. She totally could have if she wanted to. Her quirk is extremely powerful and...
Yes, she's powerful. She's as powerful as her paycheck is big, and that would mean that she has no excuse not to.
Whatever the black-haired man was planning on saying was cut off by a particular loud blonde. And no, not Kacchan, the other one.
Hey, Shota!
Present Mike yelled, a dazzlingly bright smile on his face as he stood before the duo, seemingly unperturbed at the deadly vibes Aizawa-sensei was giving off.
And the green bean himself! How you doing there, little listener?
Isuku's relief was palpable. Finally, an opportunity to inch away from the annoyed underground hero.
Great!
Horrible. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm not a monster, but I have a strange urge to talk to him a little late.
His teacher cut himself off, sniffing at the air before his eyes locked on the item Mike-sensei was holding. Said item had scalding hot liquid inside of it, and it smelled like heaven.
Coffee.
In the blink of an eye, the cup was out of the voice hero's hands and gripped between Aizawa-sensei's. He heard Mike mutter a soft, like a moth to a flame.
Mike-sensei, what are you doing here?
Isuku asked cheerfully.
Oh, you know, doing my daily patrol around the building to make sure this grumpy goose.
The loud blonde playfully hit Aizawa-sensei on the arm, getting a low grumble in return.
Doesn't scare the students and teachers more than he already has.
That sounded like a reasonable concern, honestly, but the other man wasn't buying it.
Vlad deserves whatever happens to him. Also, you had no way of knowing if I would walk the same route, so why are you just randomly carrying around a cup of black coffee? You don't even like black coffee, if you weren't going to drink it.
Mike-sensei gave a loud chuckle and landed another playful hit to the man's arm, and Isuku was suddenly reminded of the fact that these two knew each other during their UA years. They must have been pretty close, too, since it seemed like Present Mike is one of the only people who would dare to try and be playful with Aizawa-sensei. The other one most likely being Midnight-sensei.
Can't I just do it out of the kindness of my heart, Sho?
Aizawa-sensei grumbled again, earning another laugh.
Ha! Well, I'd love to chat more, but I gotta get back if I don't want to be on the wrong end of Koda's disappointed stare. I'll see you two hooligans later. Doodles!
And with that, the voice hero was sprinting to class and out of sight, leaving the principal and secretary duo in his dust. The hallway was filled with silence, but it wasn't awkward, mostly because he was pretty sure that both of them had no idea what to make of the interaction. The silence remained all the way until they got into the UA-owned car, with his stoic teacher sitting in the driver's seat and Isuku rushing to claim shotgun even though no one else was there to fight him for it. He knew the man was probably still caught up thinking about the coffee, or maybe even thinking about what they were going to do about the low number of applicants, but there was something he had to say to get off his chest. Something of great importance. And because of that, he turned to face his teacher and said, with the most serious tone he could,
"Are Koda and Mike-sensei really not aware of the effect their disappointed stares have on each other?"
And that was the last silent moment they had the whole drive. Shota trudged down the pathway to the hospital's front doors, his bright-eyed student bouncing along beside him. In the end, they had concluded that no, Hisashi and Koda aren't aware of how their stares affect each other, and even the people around them, although they also decided it would be wise for the two to never find out, or else they would be an unstoppable force. Both of them were dead serious on the matter, but Shota seemed to be the only one who noticed the irony. Midoriya, of all people, had no right to talk about the effect of other people's stares when he was still somehow oblivious to his own. When he glares at someone, they act like Medusa just turned them into a petrified statue. When he gives someone puppy eyes, they automatically lose their so-called unbreakable will. And when he smiles, he can make even the most stoic person light up. Shota excluded. Because even on the emotionless spectrum, he's, at the highest, most unattainable level, so don't even mention the flukes of him laughing. But honestly, that's the closest Todoroki and Tokoyami have ever come to full-on grinning. It's almost scary how the school unintentionally revolves around the kid. Not that he's complaining. It was all the more reason to have the kid as his secretary, because no one would dare question the kid about having notebooks of information on them. Shaking himself out of that thought, Shota focused on the matter at hand, the hospital. He wanted more medical staff, but he really hated the interview process. Actually, he hated socializing in general. So he guesses that's one upside to having a low number of applicants. He can go home a hell of a lot faster. Sighing, he reached out his hand to grip the door and open it. Except he didn't. Before he could make contact with the handle, the doors burst open and a tall man with heterochromatic black and gray eyes with hair to match pushed through, grabbing Shota's hand and shaking it rapidly. Pretty roughly, too. Shota found he didn't like that. All the underground hero could do was stare in shock and wonder at who the hell this energetic man was. What the hell?
Ah, hello! You must be Aizawa Shota, and you?
The man turned to face his student, who looked just as disturbed as Shota, but still managed to summon a wobbly smile. Now that took skill.
Must be Midoriya Isuku, a prized UA student. When I checked my email last night only to see that the man in charge of UA was coming to scout my employees, I just knew I had to greet you two myself.
Once again, what?
Man in charge of... Oh.
Right, he forgot he was legitimately responsible for the entirety of UA now, and not just some tired schmuck who ran around traumatizing his coworkers. But that didn't explain how this man knew Midoriya. He remembered stating in his email that he'd be bringing a student/secretary along, but not once had he mentioned his name. Shota suddenly froze. Did this man do research on them before they arrived here? Unfortunately, he wasn't given any more time to think on that, as the man was already dragging him by his wrist through the hospital, Midoriya flanking behind him with his notebook already out and pencil at the ready. By the time 5 minutes had passed, Shota, Midoriya, and Hironori Hekima, as his badge said, were seated on one side of an obnoxiously long table. Midoriya had his notebooks out in front of him, as well as the list of questions to ask that Shota had given him. Hironori had a gavel for some unknown reason, and the heroics teacher himself just had the pitiful, empty cup of what his black coffee used to be.
Since I only received the email yesterday, there wasn't much time to gather up applicants.
Yep, that sounded about right.
But since UA is an establishment of such great prestige, I knew I couldn't settle for a measly 12.
Come again? Shota straightened out of his slouching position to face the man. Please let this not mean what he thinks it means.
So, instead of just sending a staff-wide email about the interviews happening today that most of them probably wouldn't see that late at night, I proceeded to personally call each employee repeatedly until they picked up the call, allowing me to tell them a complete rundown of the job. I sent you that email at 12:30, a time when most people are sleeping.
The black-haired man breathed out, disbelief lacing his voice, but Hironori was unperturbed.
Oh, I know. That's 'cause they were sleeping. But don't worry, I made sure to wake all of them so that they could receive the information you provided in the email.
Oh my god. Shota has become the one thing he vowed to destroy. A person who interrupts sleep. The employees here are already overworked, yet last night they had to listen to an overly enthusiastic man rant about UA's prestige and summarize the 5 paragraphs of information Shota had originally written to him. What kind of monster would do that intentionally? Oh, that's right. Hironori Hekima would. But there's only one thing that's nagging at him.
You called every employee?
The man happily nodded, unaware of the fear that was climbing its way into the underground hero's gut.
Then how many people here are going to apply?
Even without the man's response, the Cheshire Cat smile that slithered onto his face was all Shota needed to know that this was going to be a horrible, horrible day.
50!
Shota gave a blank stare down at his empty coffee cup, and a knock was heard by the door.
And that's the first one now!
He slammed his head down against the table, because at this point it might be the only thing that shocks him out of his self-pity and back into work mode. Hironori flinches at the sound, but Midoriya doesn't even bat an eye, and he guesses that's good since they both need to be functioning for this new plan to work.
Midoriya,
He grumbles out, a little muffled from the table.
do you remember every intimidation technique I told you about?
Yup.
Good. Finally, something good.
He sat up and gave the dirtiest glare he could at the door.
Good cop, bad cop. Freak them out, analyze. It's the only way to get through them fast enough. The only people we'll hire are the ones who have credentials to make up for their weird habits. Or, best of all, have credentials and no weird habits.
But what counts as a weird habit?
Yes.
Shota provided no other explanation and gave Hironori, the bastard, a nod, signaling for him to open the door and let the first one in.
Well, let's get this show on the road. And may God have mercy on our souls.
Shota stared at the man before him, aquamarine hair spiking around his head, short in size, and lime green eyes. But other than that, he was relatively normal. Well, besides the 6 blue lines that curled around his nose like whiskers on a cat. The gruff teacher had half the sense to hire him just for that, but unfortunately he realized the irresponsibility of that decision. Sighing, he proceeded with the regular questioning.
Name? Orochimiya.
Orochi smirked. Huh, he's a smug one, isn't he? Shota gave a subtle glance to his secretary and was pleased to see the exact same observation already written down on the man's page, as well as 2 other paragraphs, and an incredibly detailed sketch. What the hell is this kid made of? Quirk? His green-haired student was vibrating in excitement for the awaiting answer.
Whisker. I can telepathically remove the lines from my face and make them pick up the items around me all at once.
Well, he guessed the smug smirk was at least partially earned. It was one hell of a useful quirk, but still, mentally smirking, Shota watched as his student began the act, trusting Midoriya knew what to do.
Wow, that's such an awesome quirk! Imagine how useful it'd be at a time when you're required to hold multiple items at once! I bet you could even stitch up a wound with that! So many possibilities!
Feed the ego. Midoriya's bright smile suddenly took on a sharper, darker turn. And go in for the kill.
But what are the limitations?
Limitations?
Orochi tilted his head, confused but keeping up the smile.
How many whiskers can you use at once? Is there a maximum amount of weight that you can hold for each one, or is it just in total? Is there a range for how far apart the whiskers can be from you at all times? What are the consequences of going past your limits? And a lot more.
Shota told him passively, picking at his nails like he'd rather be anywhere else. That last part wasn't an act, though.
Well, I think...
The underground hero didn't let him finish.
How complex can the actions of your whiskers be? And depending on the complexity of the action, does it get sloppier, slower?
He could go on, but he's starting to analyze almost as much as Midoriya.
Well,
Orochi chuckled and rubbed the back of his neck, a telltale sign that he was nervous and stalling an actual answer in favor of protecting his pride.
I never really thought about it before. Probably because you are too careless to consider the idea that you're not indestructible and that your quirk isn't so special after all.
Probably because it's such a powerful quirk to have that you only looked at the general summary. I know plenty of heroes who do that too. It's a good strategy when you're clearing your mind and relieving stress.
Shota's student cheered. Orochi looked back and forth between Shota and Midoriya, between overwhelming praise and intense criticism, with wavering pride and wide eyes. The underground hero rejoiced at the whiplash he must be feeling right about now.
Right. Now, it'd be weird to assume you would already have a resume ready, so you can just state your qualifications.
The aqua-haired man opened his mouth.
And we'll background check it later.
His mouth shut. Are you kidding him right now?
I got some bachelor degrees from Aichi Medical University, and then I got a job here right after.
This guy couldn't be any older than 27, so he must have been there for about 4 or 5 years. Good. Some information he can use as ammo.
Right out of university, huh? What's that? 4, 5...
Orochi gave another proud smile.
Months?
The smile fell just as fast, and Shota heard a choked sound coming from his secretary.
No, I've worked here for 4 years.
The blue-haired man said awkwardly, and Shota faked a shocked look.
Years? Jesus, my bad. I assumed it would have taken you 8 years to get those degrees, meaning you'd only have been working here for a short amount of time.
Emphasis on the you. God, he loves destroying their dignity.
You must have been such a fast learner to have blown through your studies so fast.
What is it with his students being such great actors? First Shinso, and now Problem Child?
Yes, blowing through them and not taking the time to develop any knowledge you may have gained from that university. Fast doesn't equal good, after all.
And just think of the experience!
Midoriya exclaimed happily. Orochi suddenly stood up, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor resonating around the room. He had a bewildered look on his face as his head whipped back and forth between the principal and secretary duo until finally his features melted into something pitifully blank.
I think I'm gonna go.
Thank you for putting yourself out there to apply. What matters is that you dared to try. Have an amazing day.
I would say the ends justify the means, but your means were pathetic and your ends show your lack of determination. Please, never curse my eyes with your presence again.
The green-eyed man then slowly shook his head, turned around, and walked out the room, leaving amused silence in his wake. It took another 5 seconds for his student to speak up.
Well, I appreciate the running commentary of good cop, bad cop.
So did he, to be honest.
Why are we doing it again?
Well, there are several reasons. One is that if they can't handle anything I say to them, they won't last a second with any harsher students. Or just Bakugo in general. At least I have the sympathy to filter out my explicit cursing.
Midoriya nodded at that, well aware of his explosive classmates' habits when it came to roasting newcomers.
The second reason is that if they actually gave a damn about this job, then they would have sense to fully prepare. Orochi couldn't even give the names of the kinds of degrees he supposedly earned. He thought dropping the name of some random college would be enough. And what kind of professional doesn't test the limits of their own quirk? Finally,
he sighed.
The more criticism I give, the faster they leave. And in turn, the faster I can go home and sleep.
He hadn't had the chance to use his sleeping bag for the last 3 days. How is he functioning? He doesn't know.
We can't make them all leave, though, so we'll have to eventually hire someone. In which case, what traits are we looking for?
Shota thought for a second before replying.
Someone who knows the specifics of their quirk. Someone who can specify all their credentials and experience without having to go to them on it. And someone who realizes the job is more important than getting pissed about someone's opinion of them.
Midoriya nodded, writing every word down, but he wasn't done yet. The underground hero turned to face the bushy-haired boy with an exasperated look on his face, but serious nonetheless.
But most importantly, someone who doesn't refuse to treat a student's injuries.
Midoriya choked. Well, let the interviews begin. No, I think I'm just ready to move on to bigger and better things, Aneko Bashira said dreamily.
We're flattered you consider UA to be bigger and better. If you don't mind me asking, why exactly would you call it that in comparison to Musutafu General Hospital?
Midoriya asked. Oh, well, that's easy. Here we just get some regular old patients, nothing too exciting. What exactly is supposed to be exciting about injured civilians? But at UA, I bet there are tons of gruesome medical cases for such a famous, powerful school. That's not a good thing. Did this woman become a nurse practitioner just because she hoped to see a crippled hero someday? I can picture it now. An arm broken beyond repair, a leg that needs to be amputated, extreme burns that cover so much of the body that their family can't even identify.
Ma'am, I'm afraid we're going to have to turn you down, and I recommend getting a psych evaluation before the day is over.
You've worked here for 10 years? Quite an impressively long time, if I do say so myself, and so much working experience. You must love it here, and you must never want to leave. And I'd hate to be the person that takes you away from your personal paradise of surgical masks and Clorox wipes.
Shota mustered up the most realistic, sympathetic frown he could give after Midoriya's statement, which wasn't easy considering he rarely ever pities the fools with no potential.
Oh, please, by all means, take me away.
Renzo laughed, although there was an edge of pleading to his voice.
Take you away? Forget what the kid said about personal paradise. This is probably your prison cell. I'm guessing you hate all your coworkers and superiors. I recommend you flee the country.
The applicant with metallic nails looked shocked by the complete 180 in his interviewer's analysis. Was Shota milking it? Probably, but he couldn't find himself to care.
Ha! Flee the country. Such jokers you got over there at UA. And, well, I wouldn't exactly say prison cell, but...
Oh? Both Shota and Midoriya quirked an eyebrow, prodding him to continue, which, after a sigh and a couple of laughs, fell right into their trap.
You're completely right. The people here are awful. Haneko is an obsessed fangirl. Kaida won't shut up about a lack of quirk discrimination laws, and...
Renzo leaned a little too close, an evil glint in his eyes that neither of the interviewing duo was comfortable with.
I'm technically not allowed to tell you this, but last week this patient, Taiga Kaio, got sent here after his quirk came in. Some disgusting little power that allows him to pull off his body parts like Lego pieces. Ugh. Anyways, this brat pulled off his toe and had no idea how to put it back on and threw the most annoying temper tantrum. Whining, crying, so goddamn pathetic.
Shota didn't let him finish.
It's clear you have no respect for doctor-patient confidentiality, nor the privacy of your coworkers. And who calls a panicking toddler that just had their life turned upside down pathetic? I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
So basically, my quirk is called Ice Pack, Nariko Rie stated quietly, curling her snow-white hair around her fingers. I can use the moisture from my hands to make hand-shaped slabs of ice wherever I place it. Although recently I discovered that I can make even smaller pieces of ice using the pads of my fingers. The ice sticks onto the place I put it, but how long it stays there depends on the temperature of the water used. Hot water will only last about 30 minutes, but ice-cold water could last for hours.
You're hired.
Shota stated, getting a shocked look from the female applicant and a seriously look from his student. He turned his head to address the scribbling boy.
What? Certain exceptions can be made. Do you know how much money we waste on kids who took ice packs and never gave them back? Besides, it's clear she has an advanced understanding of the limits of her quirk.
If Narika left that room not only with a business card and an orientation appointment with Nemuri tomorrow for her first day, but a beaming smile on her face and a rare confidence boost, well, then nobody had to know.
Working with heroes and Hero Course students just sounds so amazing!
Sachiro Akio gushed. Huh, another fanboy. Shota has no problem with it, looking at Midoriya, for Christ's sake, as long as they're not too excited about the possibility of seeing a hero on the verge of death.
Knowing that just by helping them, I'm being a hero in my own way, it's better than any paychecks I could receive. I totally agree!
Midoriya exclaimed, but judging by the way tears of joy were beginning to sprout from his eyes, Shota had a feeling he wasn't just saying that for the good cop, bad cop routine. Sighing, he spoke.
Yes, pro-heroes, hero students, support course kids who accidentally blew up a bomb in their face and need the soot cleaned off, business course kids who got an unhealthy amount of paper cuts and need a minuscule band-aid applied for each one, general education kids that have a simple cold but sneeze so hard that their porcupine quirk activated and repeatedly pierced their classmate, and now have to get each quill removed carefully, which takes hours, by the way. Janitors who are permanently psychologically destroyed after falling into a garbage can full of whatever Mineta just disposed of. Let me tell you, being their temporary therapist is not easy. And so much more.
Shota leaned forward, waiting to see how this man would react to his horrifying ramble. Jesus Christ, since when does he ramble? Of events.
Well,
Sachiro gave a shrug, still engrossed in his heroic fantasy.
as long as I get to help others, I don't care how much time and effort it'll take.
Huh. Now that's what he calls an employee.
You're hired!
Midoriya sobbed, frantically wiping the tears away from his eyes before they could roll down his cheeks. Fumihiro Itsuki rolled his eyes as he kicked his feet up on the table. Now, Shota didn't like Hironori, and he didn't like the table either, but that's a little rude, especially for a job interview.
Why do I want to leave this shithole for you, eh? What a stupid question for such an obvious answer.
The heroics teacher felt his eye twitch.
UA wouldn't accept no third-rate chumps. People there are elite. Working there, I would finally be able to stop treating those disgusting people with the ugliest, villainous quirk. Get out.
Shota turned to his student, only to be met with a chilling sight. Midoriya was intensely glaring at the man, and suddenly the scene was almost reminiscent of the exact same thing Vlad experienced. The same suffocating pressure-filled room preventing the quirkist applicant from breathing. The black-haired man suspected that the only reason he was able to even take the shallowest of breaths was that he wasn't the intended target. His student's scarred hands were curled into tight fists, nails digging so hard into his palm it looked like they were about to shed blood. And worst of all, the kid's eyes had changed from the usual kind, forest green to a predatory, toxic green. The suit-wearing hero couldn't help but be proud of the whole thing. Midoriya was the kind of person to settle an argument through the use of logic and facts, with an occasional sprinkle of inspirational quotes, and it was rare to see him so fed up with a person that he immediately shut them down with righteous indignation. Personally, he thinks the kid should do it more often. Shota does it daily, and he could say with 100% certainty that it sure as hell speeds up the argument process and gets him 10 times more respect than he used to. But it's okay if he doesn't. Mixing up techniques is a technique on its own, after all. But that brings him to the second problem. Why is Midoriya such a passionate advocate for quirk equality? Not that he shouldn't be, but based on everything he's seen from the boy in the past, it seems like there must be some important reasoning and history behind it. Could it possibly be related to what he said about being a late bloomer? About not being treated with respect as a quirkless child? And if that's the case, then Shota is forced to ask the same question he did yesterday. Just how late of a bloomer was Midoriya? And what kind of toll did it leave on this kid? Back to the present. The glare his student gave was strong enough to paralyze anyone it was directed at, but he guessed Fumihiro's pride wouldn't let him fall for that category. The bigoted man managed to shake himself out of his frozen stupor, and he immediately returned the glare, going so far as to snarl at the kid. "Excuse me?"
Something you want to say, Fumihiro? Spit it out, or get out.
The applicant flinched behind the power of not one, but two intense glares coming from the duo in front of him. Luckily, before he could dig himself an even deeper grave, he made the wise decision to keep his mouth shut and leave the room. Not without dragging his feet, stomping, cursing, and slamming the door, though. Ugh, how extra. The gruff but attentive teacher quietly turned his head towards his student, if only to check in on how he was doing. Gone was the bone-chilling presence, the piercing glare, and the clenched fists. All that was left was a child whose sagged shoulders and dreary eyes told him all he needed to know about his tired state. It was more than concerning to know that a single interaction with a hostile doctor had greatly exhausted Midoriya mentally, and it made the underground hero even more curious as to his stance on quirk equality. But despite all the questions for the kid that were burning in his throat and sitting at the tip of his tongue, just begging to be let out, he knew this wasn't the right time. No matter what, his student's health came first, and right now, the only thing Shota could do to help the kid, his kid, was give him a well-earned break. A chance to do something just for himself and not for his new job as a secretary, and Shota has just the right thing in mind. Clearing his throat, he drew Midoriya's attention.
We've got about 4 hires so far.
The green-haired boy nodded. Oh geez, he doesn't even have enough energy to give a verbal response.
10 more to pick the last one from, and we'll be pretty much done. So I might as well take care of them myself. In the meantime, they've all got very different and complex quirks, and while they've shown to have a good enough understanding of them, I'm sure they missed a few things.
Slowly but surely, Midoriya's dull eyes began to glimmer with interest and hope.
So do you think you could spend the rest of your time here analyzing? Yes!
All traces of fatigue had immediately left the kid. Now all that was there was the pure giddiness at even the suggestion of doing his hobby. But still, he couldn't have anyone thinking he did this out of the kindness of his heart, because he didn't. Don't give him that look. He didn't. It's stupid for anyone to suggest he even had a heart in the first place, let alone a spot in there for kindness.
Only because if they want to use their quirks for medical assistance, they're going to have to know every detail to get the best quality out of. Yup! Didn't even let me.
Judging by the mischievous look in Midoriya's eyes, he was doing this on purpose now. Shota gave an amused huff and wished he still had his capture weapon with him so he could hide the way his lips twitched in an almost smile. Because he does not smile, thank you very much.
Yeah, cheeky brat.
He rolled his eyes.
Grab your notebooks and head to the waiting area just out front. Just make sure to tell Mr. Hironuri what you're doing. I don't want him to have a heart attack because he lost track of a prized UA student.
The kid snorted, and the underground hero was left wondering when he had ever started cracking jokes. God, if Fukukado could see him right now. With an enthusiastic goodbye, and a wave so aggressive it had sparks of green lightning crackling around it, Midoriya left the interview room and skipped off to his quirk analysis heaven. It was at that moment Shota realized he couldn't do the whole good cop, bad cop routine as a single person, and that he actually had to conduct the regular interviews now. It was a sad fate to resign himself to, but he didn't regret it for a second. Knowing that what he just did made his student's day even the teeniest bit better was all he needed to not completely despise the inevitable torture of 10 boring interviews. And no, it is not because of his bleeding heart. Shota trudged out of the interview room, exhausted and wanting nothing more than his yellow sleeping bag. He knew it was ugly, and he knew it made people think of a demented caterpillar, but it was comfortable nonetheless. It was also the only known cure for his insomnia, along with cats. Rounding around the hospital hallway to the front desk, the underground hero was immediately ambushed by an energetic Hironuri, guaranteeing that his torture and suffering were not over yet.
Mr. Aizawa, you finished the interviews already?
The hell does he mean by already? This took hours.
As expected from the leader of UA, I trust you found a few employees that lived up to your standards? I can't believe I'm saying this, but yes, it took a hell of a lot longer than it should have.
Hironori looked awkward at the jab, gently pulling at his tie to loosen it. Taking pity on the man, for the first time ever, Shota decided to lay off a bit.
But the ones I recruited are certainly worth the praise. I'll be taking Nariko Rei, Sachihiro Akio, Fuyuko Cho, Hina Keiko, and Makoto Fudo. They'll be starting at the earliest convenience.
The other man looked absolutely thrilled that Shota was taking a good handful of his employees, but he still looked a bit confused.
What about Fumihiro Itsuki?
Huh? What? What kind of fake personality does that jerk show around his boss for him to personally ask about him? Or is it just his quirk? He never got to ask what it was, but if both interactions were anything to go by...
I recommend you educate him on the laws of quirk discrimination in the workplace. He needs it.
Hironori stared at him with wide eyes, mouth opening and closing, but Shota didn't give him another chance to speak.
Now, where's Midoriya? Midoriya? Oh!
A grin broke around the peppered-haired man's face, and he turned to face the corner of the room across from them, where a commotion was beginning to form.
At some point he ran out of hires, so he started asking my other employees if he could get a demonstration and run down their quirk and analyze it. They must have been very flattered, because the next thing you know, he's at the center of a mob.
Hironori looked back at him with a soft smile.
He's such a good kid.
The underground hero watched as his student animatedly talked to each employee, writing faster than what should be humanly possible with stars in his eyes. If this time is anything similar to the other times, then the green-eyed kid must be spit-firing questions at all of them about their quirk, questions that they most likely never considered. And judging by the employees' reactions, sheepishly rubbing the backs of their necks, faces heating up, and shining grins, they appreciated his efforts too. Midoriya likely had no idea how much his good deeds affected others, how it was enough to turn a bad guy into a great one, and that's what made it all the more heroic.
Yeah, he is.
And if Shota forced himself to put up with Hironori's constant praises of Fumihiro for a few more minutes just so Midoriya could have a little more time to analyze quirks, then it still wasn't because he had a heart. Shota once again sat by the window of his classroom, listening to the white noise of his students' chatterings as he stared at the cloudy blue sky. He would have preferred to brood in the faculty lounge, but a teacher's duty calls after all. Lately, he's been doing more of this, whatever this is, that causes him to tune out of his surroundings and just reminisce about the day. It was quite peaceful, if he was being honest, and he wondered if this is what Midoriya experienced when he entered his quote-unquote analysis zone, as he heard Shinso call it once. The Erasure hero had already discussed the new employees with Recovery Girl about 10 minutes ago, but apparently that was too late of a notice for her liking. He guessed he should have seen it coming, but that didn't make him any less pissed. She had the nerve to go off on him about not asking her in advance when they both knew that her permission wouldn't have mattered either way. He so badly wanted to return the favor, confront and yell at her for what she had said to his secretary about not healing any more of his injuries. He understands that it used to be frustrating when the kid kept breaking his bones, but that's no excuse to leave him hanging. Still, he didn't address it. After all, it happened a year ago, and she might have already realized the error of her ways. And it's not the wisest idea to piss off the person that heals all of your extreme injuries. So, instead, he chose to present her with the facts. And maybe a little passive aggression. He said it wasn't only for her sake, but for the sake of the students of UA. Whether she likes it or not, she can't take care of all of them. Because, frankly, that's naive and impulsive. Not that he'd ever say that to her face. It all worked out in the end, though, and he'd be lying if he said he wasn't interested in seeing the Ice Pack Girl's quirk in action. Speaking of quirks, Midoriya probably filled up both notebooks with all the notes he took on the employees. He's gonna have to get him some more.
Aizawa-sensei.
Shota's head whipped around, coming face to face with Todoroki. The red and white-haired boy usually had a blank expression on his face, but today he seemed a little contemplative. He was obviously trying to look bored, but the way his eyes darted around every object on Shota's desk told him that he was obviously planning something. The question is, what?
Todoroki,
He greeted back in his regular deadpan voice.
do you need something?
The boy's heterochromatic eyes gleamed, and suddenly Shota was rethinking all of his life decisions. The boy whipped out his notebook and immediately began speaking.
Over the last 2 days, I have conducted an investigation of great importance, one that pertains specifically to you. And now, with all my collected research, I have decided to finally present my conclusion to you.
Jesus Christ, if this is one of those theories that Ashido talks about... He grunted and took a sip of his coffee, signaling for his student to continue. Todoroki shoved the notebook in his face.
Is Midoriya your secret love child?
Shota spat out his coffee right back into the cup, earning a couple of weird looks from his students, but he couldn't care less about that right now.
What?
This has to be a joke, right? Todoroki's been spending some time with Kaminari lately. Is this some sort of prank the other kid devised? Shota desperately searched his student's eyes for any sign of amusement or mischief, but all he found was ice-cold seriousness.
I used to think that Shinso Hitoshi was your son, but a week ago you dragged me to meet his parents at the front of the gate just to prove me wrong. Of course, there's always the chance he hired those adults on Craigslist, but I doubt he'd go that far.
Did this kid think he had 2 illegitimate children?
As for Midoriya, I used to think he was All Might's secret love child, and part of me still does, but your case provides more evidence.
Nope, absolutely not. He will not be put in the same position as All Might.
Todoroki, there's no evidence.
Exhibit A, genetics.
Oh God, please, no.
As anyone can see, Midoriya takes after his mother with green eyes and green hair, except his hair isn't green. Contrary to popular belief, it's green and black. I checked. Who has black hair? You.
Like a million other
Your quirk is erasure. It erases someone's quirk. Midoriya once told me that he was a late bloomer and considered quirkless for a while. I assumed that people with erasure quirks create a risk for their children being late bloomers or quirkless.
First of all, quirks aren't passed down like that. And second, Midoriya is no longer quirkless. Therefore, your argument is invalid.
Whenever Midoriya is powered up, his hair begins to float. Who else has floating hair? You.
It floats because of the
Exhibit B, traits.
Todoroki turned the page and Shota spluttered. He's just now getting to B? Did they not already get to D? Nope, scratch that. He does not want to hear any of his evidence in the first place. But how much evidence does he have?
This morning before you came into class, we asked Midoriya questions about his job as secretary, and I noticed some questionable details. He drinks coffee, just like you do, instead of tea. You taught him the same intimidation techniques that you use on others, specifically the glare. You both have the same bag now, and most importantly...
A shadow passed over the boy's face.
You both use the word classified.
Shota looked at the boy. Really looked this time. Part of him was still grasping onto the hope that this was some sort of weird prank. Another part wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the accusations. A third part wanted to ask when Todoroki had the time to put all of this together and what kind of data he had in that notebook of his. But the final part just wanted to bash his head against the wall and curse the gods. He settled for secret option number 5, logic.
Todoroki. No.
The dual-haired boy opened his mouth, probably to protest or spout more evidence, but Shota did not have the energy to live through another rant. The underground hero silenced him with a look and dragged a hand down his face, continuing.
Midoriya is my student, not my secret love child. I think I'd know if I had one. Also, I'm 31 and the kid is 16. The timeline does not add up. Not to mention his mother is over 10 years my senior. And just so we can settle all this now, Midoriya isn't All Might's child either. If he was, he'd never shut up about it.
I don't think Midoriya would be the type of person to brag about All Might being his father.
I know. I mean, All Might would never shut up about it.
It's common knowledge around here that Yagi sees Midoriya as his son, and he's pretty damn proud of it too. So if it were official, All Might would make sure to let the entire school know. No, the entire country of Japan know.
Now, I need you to tell me you know that Midoriya is not my secret love child.
Todoroki hummed, his head hanging low, and Shota rolled his eyes.
Todoroki.
The dual-quirked boy let out a quiet sigh of defeat before doing as told.
Midoriya is not your secret love child.
Shota leaned back in his chair with closed eyes, his relief palpable, and breathed out a soft thank you.
But if All Might's not his dad, and you're not his dad, even though you both act like it...
The heroics teacher's eyes shot open.
Then who is?
Deciding that the specific phrase he heard Todoroki say was just his ears playing tricks on him, he gave the best answer he could.
Unfortunately, I don't know, even though I'd really like to.
And he did. He's heard so much random information about the man that he can't get a clear picture of his personality.
But despite that, I'm not going to conduct research on Midoriya to find out, because that's not right, and it's an invasion of his privacy.
Todoroki wilted.
Then how am I supposed to find out?
Well, you could ask him, although I doubt he'd give you anything other than a cryptic answer that just leaves you with more questions.
That's what happened to him, at least.
Either way, my main concern here is making sure you don't make any more theories on your peers. You may have good intentions, but rumors can spread in ways you never imagined.
I don't intend to share my theories with anyone other than the subjects of them. Even if I did, I know for sure that not all of them are just rumors.
Jeez, now he's just grasping at straws.
There has to be some theories in here that actually have some depth behind them.
Shota sighed.
Yeah? Which one?
He didn't like the idea of hearing rumors about his students, but it's better if he shuts them down now than watching them snowball later. Todoroki got the same evil glint in his eye as he flipped to another random page.
Momo is in some way related to Fat Gum.
Shota is already regretting this.
Tamaki Amajiki is Midnight's son. Toga Himiko is Vlad King's daughter. Hawks and Tokoyami are also related in some way, but my best guess is cousins. Dabi is my older brother.
I'm sorry, but what the hell?
Shigaraki and Midoriya both shop at the same clothing store.
Todoroki, why the hell do you think Dabi is your brother? You said you only have 2 siblings.
He knows they both have fire quirks, but still, that's kind of a stretch.
I actually have 3 siblings, or I guess had.
Shota furrowed his eyebrows at that phrasing, concern lacing his features.
My older sister, Fuyumi, my older brother, Natsuo, and my eldest brother, Toya.
Hesitantly, the gruff teacher asked the inevitable question.
What happened to Toya?
He didn't want to overstep his boundaries, but this felt like something Todoroki needed to let out, even if he didn't realize it just yet. And he obviously didn't, judging by his emotionless expression.
When he first got his quirk, his body couldn't handle the flames. It was powerful, strong enough to cremate anything it touched, but my father deemed it useless, so he moved on to me.
What did that mean?
I was still pretty young at the time, so I don't remember exactly what happened, but Toya died in an accident regarding his quirk.
Shota felt his body tense up and his breaths go shallow.
They never found his body.
I'm sorry for your loss,
he said carefully, unsure of Todoroki's mental state at the moment and what could potentially send him into a breakdown. So you can imagine his surprise when absolutely nothing changed about the boy.
Don't be. I hardly remember him anyways.
Still.
Point is, I'm not sure he's dead anymore.
Shota still doesn't feel comfortable with this, but it's not about what he feels. It's about Todoroki. How did it get from Midoriya being his secret love child to this?
We never found his body. We just assumed he had burned to death. After seeing Dabi, it's a real possibility that he had faked it. Recently, I've discovered that with enough concentration, my fire can turn blue, the same shade of Dabi's fire. Dabi's fire can also decimate any obstacles. The scars on him also suggest that his body isn't suited for his quirk, just like Toya. His eyes are blue, just like my father's, and Dabi specifically targeted my father during his fight with Hawks against the Nomus. There are too many coincidences for it to not mean something.
Shota hates to say it, but it made sense. And he didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. On one hand, great. The brother he believed to be dead for the majority of his life was actually alive, and they may have a chance of reuniting. On the other hand, shit. Todoroki's brother, the son of the #1 hero, faked his death and became a villain. He doesn't care so much that he is, more about why. He's met Endeavor on several occasions, and he can say from experience that if he had to sleep in the same house as that man, he'd throw himself off a building. But it's clearly more extreme than he'd originally thought if it was enough to motivate Toya into teaming up with the League. He would have to look into it this week no matter what. He may just be a teacher or principal, but these students are his responsibility, and he'll do whatever it takes to make sure that they're safe. Midoriya, Todoroki, and whoever else needs it. Shota then realized that the dual-quirked boy had finished his explanation and was now waiting for an actual answer. Yeah, he'd help these kids, but right now he had to find the least awkward way to end this conversation, encourage Todoroki, and find out how to help them.
I see. You do have solid reasoning for this theory, and I don't doubt you have more for the others too. But unfortunately, there's no way to be 100% sure unless you get undeniable evidence, so I suggest you start with that.
God, this better not backfire.
Although you shouldn't try getting more information on Dabi, you should practice getting more information on another theory so that you can have an easier time doing the same with your brother's case.
I think I get what you mean.
Does he? Does he? Shota really hopes there's no misunderstandings, or else he might just end up getting burned to death.
But which theory should I use as practice?
Toga Himiko being Vlad King's daughter.
He replied with no hesitation. This may be the one decision that he's made in the last 10 minutes that he doesn't regret. Todoroki gave a firm nod, seeming to have forgotten what the topic of this conversation was originally about. Not that that's a bad thing.
Yes, Aizawa-sensei.
Godspeed.
And with that, the boy shot off back to his desk and resumed his scribbling. Only then did Shota realize the tension that had been building up in his shoulders ever since the name Toya was mentioned. Okay, so list of things to manage. Todoroki's emotionless state when discussing his maybe dead, maybe villain brother, the way Endeavor manages his household, Midoriya's sensitivity to quirk discrimination and his devotion to the quirkless, and finally, the best way to make Vlad's life a living hell. Yeah, it sounded like a lot now that he put it all out into the open. He's going to have to be smart about this. If he's too straightforward, he'll scare off his students before he can identify the problem and solve it. If he tells anyone, specifically Midoriya, what his new list is and how he's included in it, he will no doubt reject formulating a functional plan. And Lord knows he needs Midoriya to make the best plan possible. Oh. Shota smirked. So that's what he'll do. A few minutes later, the bell had rung. The students and teachers had left the building. Hisashi dropped Shota off at his apartment, and the tired man was left by himself with nothing but a computer, coffee mug, and notebook in front of him to hatch his new course of action. Or, at least, the course of action for making the next course of action. God, this is too complicated. But yeah, he'd help his students all right, and he'll do it not just as new Principal Vue, but as the scheming underground hero that he is. 5 minutes later, it occurred to Shota that his student had legitimately asked if Midoriya was his son, and that he'd never be able to look Mrs. Midoriya in the eyes ever again. Howdy, howdy, fellow rats. Hope you enjoyed. Sorry it took me so long to post. I've been a wee bit ocupado with school and life, especially now that we're gearing up for the end of the semester. A little heads up that the next post most likely won't be until Friday because I just haven't had the most time to record lately. Also, let me just say I absolutely adore conspiracy theorist Todoroki. Literally the funniest shit to me. Has me wheezing. Oh, also super random, but for my fellow theater kids / musical junkies, I totally recommend that y'all go watch the upload of Ride the Cyclone, Slime tutorial on YouTube. Okay, little future me interjection. I went to look and see if the Ride the Cyclone slime video on YouTube got taken down, and it had, but here's the thing. I had downloaded the video already, so I uploaded it to archive.org, okay? So, if anybody just so happens to want to watch a slime tutorial, then the link's gonna be in the description. Shh, don't out me, y'all. But, for real though, the chaotic energy of that play had me pissing my pants, not to mention the stunning vocals. Damn! Oh my god, pop off, queen, holy shit. Y'all need to appreciate Jane Doe. Her performance is brilliant. 1 billion out of 10, I recommend. But anywho, I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, feel free to leave a like or comment down below, because I always love hearing from you guys. And make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date with whenever I post. Oh, and what the fuck? 600 subscribers? Damn, that's kind of wild. But anyways, as always, I command you, as your overlord, to go chug-a-lug-glug some water, you freaking gremlins.